Dear listener, step into the Hercule Poirot story podcast, where sharp minds crack the darkest riddles of the heart. Tonight, dive into the lavish Hotel Magnifique on Nice's sparkling French Riviera in the jazzy 1920s, where breezy tunes hide deadly whispers. Grab your imaginary detective hat and team up with the brilliant Hercule Poirot in this web of betrayal and brilliance. Spark your own wits. Guess the villain before the twist. In Poirot's realm, nothing is as it seems. Cozy up with tea and let the intrigue begin. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. In the resplendent dining hall of the Hotel Magnifique, nestled upon the sun-drenched yet now tempest-tossed coast of Nice on the French Riviera, the year was 1927. An epoch when the world teetered between the exuberance of the Jazz Age and the lingering shadows of the Great War. The hotel itself was a monument to opulence, its marble facade etched with the intricate carvings of Art Deco motifs, and its interiors a symphony of gilded mirrors, velvet draperies, and crystal chandeliers that dangled like frozen cascades of light. On this particular evening, however, the grandeur was subdued by the fury of an unseasonal storm, which had descended upon the Riviera with the abruptness of a divine reprimand. Sheets of rain lashed against the windows, blurring the view of the churning Mediterranean Sea, while gusts of wind moaned through the eaves, as if the elements themselves were lamenting some impending calamity. The assembled guests, confined by the inclement weather, had gathered for what was intended to be a sumptuous dinner, an affair orchestrated by the hotel's proprietress with her customary precision. The air within the hall was redolent with the aromas of culinary delights, roasted herbs, fresh-baked bread, and the subtle tang of sea salt from the nearby waves. Yet beneath this sensory tapestry lurked an undercurrent of unease, a palpable tension that no amount of fine wine could dispel. It was as though the storm outside had seeped into the souls of those present, stirring dormant animosities and unspoken grievances. At a discreet corner table, ensconced in a high-backed chair that afforded him an unobstructed vista of the room, sat Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective whose reputation for unraveling the most labyrinthine mysteries had preceded him even to this remote enclave of luxury. Poirot was a diminutive figure, his stature belying the formidable intellect housed within his egg-shaped cranium. His mustache, waxed to impeccable points, quivered slightly as he sipped a tisane, his piercing green eyes that missed naught, scanning the assemblage with the acuity of a hawk surveying its domain. Poirot's psychology was a marvel of order and method. He abhorred disorder in all its forms, viewing the human mind as a mechanism that, when properly calibrated, could discern truth from the chaos of deception. He had come to the Hotel Magnifique seeking repose after a particularly taxing case in London, where he had exposed a ring of jewel thieves masquerading as society elites. Yet, as was often the case with Poirot, tranquility proved elusive, for his little gray cells, those indefatigable sentinels of logic, were ever vigilant. At the epicenter of the gathering, presiding over the central table like a monarch upon his throne, was Sir Reginald Harrington, a man whose very presence commanded attention. At 55 years of age, Sir Reginald was a colossus of industry, his florid complexion and robust frame speaking to a life of indulgence tempered by the relentless drive of ambition. His occupation as a magnate in steel and shipping had forged him a fortune vast enough to rival the treasuries of small nations, yet it had also tempered his character into something unyielding and often merciless. His voice boomed across the hall, a resonant baritone that brooked no interruption as he regaled his companions with anecdotes of corporate conquests. Psychologically, Sir Reginald was a fortress of self-assurance, impervious to doubt and armored against empathy. His pride was his bulwark, but it concealed fissures of paranoia born from years of navigating the treacherous waters of business rivalries and betrayals. Little did he know, as he raised his goblet in a toast, that this evening would mark the culmination of those very enmities. Flanking Sir Reginald was his wife, Lady Amelia Harrington, a woman of exquisite poise whose beauty, even in her 40s, evoked the timeless allure of a Renaissance portrait. Her raven hair was artfully coiffed in an upswept style, adorned with a single diamond clip that caught the chandelier's light like a captive star. Her eyes, deep pools of shadowed sapphire, held a melancholy that bespoke years of quiet endurance. Physically graceful, with the slender lines of a dancer, Lady Amelia moved with a deliberate elegance that masked the turmoil within. Her psyche was a labyrinth of suppressed emotions. Married young to a man whose affections had waned in favor of boardroom battles and fleeting liaisons, she harbored a resentment that simmered like embers beneath ash. Her motive, though unspoken, was rooted in the promise of liberation. Sir Reginald's will, of which she was the primary beneficiary, represented not merely wealth, but escape from a union that had become a gilded cage. Poirot noted her forced smile, the way her fingers tightened imperceptibly around her napkin, a subtle clue to the storm raging within her composed exterior. Beside her lounged Mr. Victor Lang, Sir Reginald's business partner, a man whose lean physique and sharp features suggested the cunning of a fox rather than the brute strength of his associate. At 48, Lang sported a pencil-thin mustache and wire-rimmed spectacles that magnified his shrewd, calculating gaze. His attire, a tailored suit of charcoal gray, was impeccable, yet there was an air of calculated nonchalance about him, as if he were perpetually assessing the odds in some invisible game. Psychologically, Lang was the archetype of the opportunist, his mind a chessboard where every move was plotted for advantage. Recent disputes with Sir Reginald over alleged embezzlements had strained their partnership. Lang's motive was one of self-preservation, laced with revenge, for exposure would mean ruin. Poirot observed his furtive glances toward the clock, a behavioral tic that hinted at impatience, or perhaps anticipation of some event yet to unfold. Then there was Arthur Harrington, Sir Reginald's nephew and presumptive heir, a young man of 25 whose dissolute lifestyle had etched premature lines upon his otherwise handsome face. His tousled blonde hair and perpetual sneer lent him the air of a Byronic anti-hero, but his darting eyes betrayed the anxiety of a cornered animal. Physically lithe, yet lacking in vigor, Arthur slouched in his chair, his fingers fidgeting with the cufflinks of his shirt, a habit that Poirot recognized as a manifestation of nervous energy. Arthur's psyche was a maelstrom of entitlement and desperation. Burdened by gambling debts that mounted like a tidal wave, he viewed his uncle's fortune as his salvation. The motive was clear: avarice, pure and unadulterated, hidden behind a facade of familial loyalty. Earlier that afternoon, Poirot had chanced upon a heated exchange between uncle and nephew in the hotel gardens, where words like debts and disinheritance had been hurled like daggers. Overseeing the proceedings with the vigilance of a sentinel was Madame Elise Dupont, the hotel's proprietress, a formidable presence in her 50s, whose silver-streaked hair was pulled into a severe chignon, accentuating the angular lines of her face. Her posture was rigid, as if corseted by duty, and her eyes, sharp and unyielding, missed nothing in the room. Physically imposing despite her average stature, Madame Dupont exuded an aura of authority that commanded respect. Her psychology was one of guarded fortitude, forged in the fires of personal tragedy. A long-concealed scandal involving Sir Reginald's dalliance with her late sister had left scars of bitterness. The motive here was vengeance, a cold dish served under the guise of hospitality. Poirot noted her unusually pallid complexion this evening, a deviation from her customary ruddy vigor, suggesting inner turmoil. Finally, among the guests was Dr. Elena Voss, an enigmatic physician of German descent in her late 30s, whose ash-blonde hair was cropped short in a modern, almost defiant style. Her intense gray eyes seemed to dissect those around her, as if viewing the world through a microscope. Physically poised, with the steady hands of a surgeon, Dr. Voss carried herself with a quiet intensity that bordered on the intimidating. Her psyche bore the marks of profound loss. Sir Reginald's wartime profiteering had devastated her family, planting seeds of retribution that had grown into a thorny vine of hatred. The motive was revenge, pure and historical, concealed behind her professional detachment. As the storm intensified outside, the dinner commenced with an array of appetizers: plump oysters on beds of crushed ice, foie gras terrine laced with cognac, and delicate vol au vents filled with lobster. The clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation provided a counterpoint to the howling wind. But Poirot's acute senses detected the dissonances: the forced laughter, the averted gazes, the subtle shifts in posture that spoke volumes to one attuned to the nuances of human behavior. Sir Reginald, ever the domineering host, raised his glass once more. "To prosperity, my dear companions, and to those who would dare to undermine it, may they find their ambitions dashed upon the rocks like this infernal storm." The toast elicited a ripple of laughter, but it rang hollow to Poirot's ears. Lady Amelia's smile did not reach her eyes. Lang's nod was perfunctory. Arthur's grip on his stemware tightened until his knuckles whitened. Madame Dupont hovered nearby, her expression inscrutable, and Dr. Voss merely inclined her head, her gaze fixed upon Sir Reginald with an intensity that bordered on predatory. The Belgian detective twirled his mustache thoughtfully. Already the little gray cells were stirring, sensing the invisible threads of motive and opportunity weaving a tapestry of impending doom. The storm outside was but a harbinger. The true tempest brewed within these walls, among these souls entangled in a web of secrets and desires. As the main course was announced, a succulent rack of lamb persillé, accompanied by haricots verts and a Chateau Lafite Rothschild of exceptional vintage. Poirot leaned back, his mind a whirlwind of deductions. He had no inkling yet of the tragedy to come, but the atmosphere was charged, pregnant with possibility. In the Hôtel Magnifique, on this fateful night, the stage was set for murder. Chapter 2. The Fatal Feast. The transition from the introductory courses to the main repast was executed with the flawless choreography of a ballet, as white-gloved waiters glided forth from the shadowed alcoves of the dining hall, bearing silver platters aloft like offerings to some ancient deity. The pièce de résistance was a succulent roasted quail, each bird nestled in a velvety pool of truffle sauce, its aroma a heady melange of earthiness and richness that permeated the room, mingling with the briny whisper of the storm-swept sea beyond. Accompanying this was a venerable Bordeaux, a Chateau Margaux of 1918 vintage, which Sir Reginald Harrington insisted upon decanting personally, his thick fingers handling the crystal carafe with the proprietary air of a man accustomed to command. The dining hall itself, with its vaulted ceilings adorned in frescoes depicting the bacchanalian feasts of mythological lore, satyrs cavorting amid grapevines, nymphs pouring ambrosia, seemed transformed into a theatrical stage, where the actors, unwitting or otherwise, were poised upon the precipice of tragedy. The candlelight from the chandeliers danced erratically in the draughts seeping through the casements, casting flickering shadows that elongated faces into grotesque masks, as if foreshadowing the macabre turn the evening was destined to take. Hercule Poirot, ensconced in his vantage point at the periphery, partook of the quail with the meticulous precision of a connoisseur, his fork dissecting the tender flesh not merely for sustenance, but as an exercise in contemplation. His mind, however, was far removed from gastronomic pleasures. It roamed instead through the intricate corridors of human psychology, probing the psyches of those arrayed before him with the incisiveness of a surgeon's scalpel. Poirot's own character was a paragon of order amid chaos. His egg-shaped head inclined slightly, his mustache immaculate, his green eyes absorbing every nuance of gesture and expression. He perceived the dinner not as a mere social interlude, but as a microcosm of societal tensions, where the veneer of civility concealed the primal urges of ambition, resentment, and desire. The storm outside, with its ceaseless barrage, mirrored the internal tempests he sensed brewing, and he pondered whether the elements might serve as an unwitting accomplice to some nefarious design. Sir Reginald Harrington, enthroned at the head of the table, dominated the proceedings with the unassailable confidence of a Titan. His florid countenance, flushed from the wine and the warmth of the room, beamed as he regaled his companions with tales of mercantile triumphs, his voice a resonant thunder that rivaled the storm's own fulminations. "Ah, Victor, do you recall that audacious venture in Antwerp?" he boomed, his eyes alight with the glee of recollection. "We outmaneuvered those presumptuous upstarts, crushing them beneath our heels like so many insignificant insects." The anecdote was delivered with a hearty laugh, but beneath it lay the psychology of a man who viewed the world as a battlefield, where victory was measured in ledgers and losses in the ruin of adversaries. Sir Reginald's character was forged in the crucibles of industry. His ruthless ambition had elevated him from humble origins to opulent heights, yet it had instilled a paranoia that manifested in his watchful glances, as if he anticipated betrayal at every turn. Unbeknownst to him, such apprehensions were not unfounded, for the seeds of enmity had been sown long ago in the fertile soil of his past indiscretions. Mr. Victor Lang, seated to Sir Reginald's right, responded with a nod that was stiff and mechanical, his thin lips curving into a smile that failed to illuminate his eyes. Behind those wire-rimmed spectacles, his gaze was a blade, sharp and calculating, betraying the seething resentment that roiled within. Lang's psychology was that of the perpetual schemer, a man whose intellect was a labyrinth of stratagems, ever seeking advantage in the shadows of his partner's dominance. The recent schism over embezzled funds, whispers of which had reached even Poirot's ears through the hotel's grapevine, had exacerbated this rift, transforming professional discord into a motive ripe for vengeance. Psychological clues abounded: the clench of his jaw, a subtle tick that bespoke suppressed fury, the way his fingers drummed lightly upon the tablecloth, a rhythm of impatience, and the occasional dart of his eyes toward the decanter, as if assessing an opportunity yet to present itself. Lang's affable facade was a masterstroke of deception, But to Poirot's discerning eye, it was as transparent as the Bordeaux in his glass. Lady Amelia Harrington, positioned gracefully at her husband's left, interjected with a politeness that was brittle as fine china, her voice a melodious counterpoint to the masculine bluster. "Darling, must we perpetually dwell upon the drudgery of business?" she inquired, her fingers toying idly with the strand of pearls at her throat, each bead catching the candlelight like a tear unshed. "The storm without provides ample entertainment for one evening." Her eyes, those shadowed sapphires, flickered momentarily toward young Arthur Harrington, a glance laden with unspoken complicity or perhaps maternal concern. Lady Amelia's psyche was a tapestry of quiet endurance, woven with threads of disillusionment. Her marriage, once a romantic ideal, had devolved into a procession of neglect and infidelities, eroding her affection into a reservoir of resentment. The motive shimmered beneath the surface, the vast inheritance that would grant her autonomy, freeing her from the shackles of a loveless bond. Poirot noted the faint tremor in her hand as she lifted her goblet, a psychological indicator of inner conflict, where duty warred with desire. Arthur Harrington, slouched in his seat with the indolent posture of youth, responded to her gaze with a barely concealed sneer, his youthful features twisted in disdain that he masked with a sip of wine. His blonde locks, disheveled as if by the wind, framed a face that might have been handsome were it not marred by the lines of dissipation. Arthur's psychology was a whirlpool of entitlement and desperation, his life a cascade of follies funded by expectations of inheritance. The gambling debts that plagued him, debts Poirot had gleaned from an overheard altercation earlier that day in the hotel's billiard room, provided a motive as glaring as a beacon. The elimination of his uncle would unlock the coffers, erasing his indiscretions in a flood of wealth. His fidgeting with the cufflinks, a restless habit, betrayed the anxiety gnawing at his core, a red herring perhaps, or the prelude to action. Madame Elise Dupont, the hotel's indomitable proprietress, circulated among the tables with the vigilance of a general inspecting her troops, her severe chignon and rigid posture exuding an authority that brooked no dissent. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Monsieur Harrington?" she inquired of the host, her tone laced with a formality that teetered on the edge of frostiness, her eyes, sharp as obsidian, lingering a fraction too long. Madame Dupont's psyche was armored in resilience, tempered by the tragedies of her past. The scandal of Sir Reginald's liaison with her late sister, an affair that had culminated in heartbreak and suicide, fueled a motive of vengeful retribution, concealed beneath layers of professional decorum. Poirot observed her pallor, more pronounced this evening, a deviation that hinted at emotional upheaval. Dr. Elena Voss, the enigmatic physician, engaged in hushed discourse with a waiter at the periphery, her medical bag resting unobtrusively at her feet, a detail that struck Poirot as either innocuous or ingeniously placed. Her ash-blonde crop and intense gray eyes lent her an air of Teutonic precision, her movements deliberate and economical, indicative of a disciplined mind capable of calculated endeavors. Dr. Voss's psychology bore the scars of wartime devastation. Sir Reginald's profiteering had ravaged her family, instilling a motive of righteous reprisal that simmered like a dormant volcano. Was the bag a red herring, or a repository of lethal intent? Poirot's gray cells catalogued her steady gaze upon the table, a clue to hidden machinations. As the dessert course materialized, a decadent chocolate soufflé, its surface quivering like a living entity, Sir Reginald assumed the role of barista, pouring coffee from his private stock with theatrical flair. "None of that insipid hotel brew for me," he declared boisterously, distributing the cups. Black for himself, laced with cream for the others. The aroma of the robust blend vied with the storm's ozone tang, but midway through his inaugural sip, his expression altered. This savors peculiar," he murmured, a note of bewilderment infiltrating his timbre. The chamber descended into an abrupt hush as Sir Reginald's hand ascended to his throat, his florid visage draining to a ghastly pallor. He gasped, "Poison! Someone has—" The words trailed into a guttural choke, and he collapsed forward, his face immersing in the souffle's chocolate depths. Pandemonium erupted. Lady Amelia's scream pierced the air like a siren's wail. Arthur vaulted backward, upending his chair with a clatter. Lang bellowed for medical aid. Madame Dupont froze in mid-stride, while Dr. Voss surged forth, her professional ethos overriding consternation. "Stand aside! He may yet be preserved," she commanded, but her ministrations proved vain. Sir Reginald Harrington lay inert, the victim of a virulent poison insinuated during this fatal feast. Poirot rose with unruffled composure, his voice cutting through the tumult. "Mes amis, disturb nothing. This is murder most foul." The storm raged on, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within, as the Belgian detective's little gray cells ignited in earnest pursuit of truth. Chapter 3. Shadows of Suspicion. The arrival of the local gendarmerie transformed the Hotel Magnifique from a bastion of elegance into a fortress of inquiry, their uniforms sodden from the tempest, their expressions grave as they cordoned off the dining hall with the efficiency of seasoned guardians of the law. Yet, it was not the French authorities who assumed the mantle of command, but the unassuming figure of Hercule Poirot, whose renown had traversed continents and whose presence elicited a deferential nod from the inspector in charge. "Monsieur Poirot," the officer intoned with a Gallic flourish, "your expertise is most welcome in this affair of shadows." The Belgian detective, his mustache impeccably aligned despite the chaos, inclined his head modestly, his little gray cells already whirring like the mechanisms of a finely tuned chronometer. The body of Sir Reginald Harrington had been discreetly removed under the supervision of Dr. Elena Voss, her medical acumen lending an air of clinical detachment to the proceedings, though Poirot noted her alacrity, pondering whether it stemmed from professional zeal or a more insidious motive, a potential red herring designed to deflect scrutiny. The interrogations commenced in the hotel's library, a sanctum of intellectual repose where leather-bound volumes lined the walls like silent sentinels, their spines gilded with the patina of age. The room was illuminated by the warm glow of a hearth fire, its flames crackling with a merry defiance against the storm's gloom, casting elongated shadows that danced across the Persian rugs and mahogany furniture. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of aged paper and wood smoke, a olfactory cocoon that belied the tension coiling within. Poirot seated himself in a high-winged armchair, his posture erect, his fingers steepled in contemplation, as he prepared to delve into the psyches of the suspects. His method was not one of brute confrontation, but of subtle probing, peeling away layers of deception to reveal the core of truth. The psychology of the human soul, he believed, was a mosaic of motives and misdirections, and in this mosaic he sought the anomalous tile that would shatter the illusion. First to enter was Lady Amelia Harrington, her composure a fragile edifice that threatened to crumble under the weight of grief, or perhaps guilt. She glided into the room with the grace of a specter, her raven hair slightly disheveled, her sapphire eyes rimmed with the crimson of unshed tears. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, sinking into the proffered seat. "This is a nightmare from which I cannot awaken." Her physical description remained one of ethereal beauty, yet now marred by the pallor of shock, her slender hands clasped tightly in her lap as if to anchor her trembling resolve. Psychologically, Lady Amelia was a study in suppressed turmoil. Her marriage had been a protracted siege, eroding her spirit with each infidelity and slight. The motive loomed large, the inheritance, a veritable Aladdin's cave of wealth that would emancipate her from servitude. Poirot's questions were gentle yet incisive. "Madame, where were you positioned when the coffee was served?" She recounted her proximity to the table, but a slight hesitation, a psychological clue, betrayed her when he inquired about the will. Physical evidence emerged in his notes. A scrap of lace from her gown discovered near the coffee service, ostensibly torn in the ensuing pandemonium, yet possibly a deliberate plant to sow confusion, a red herring of exquisite cunning. Following her departure, Mr. Victor Lang entered, his lean frame taut as a bowstring, his spectacles perched upon his nose like a perch for a vigilant bird of prey. He adjusted them nervously, his pencil-thin mustache twitching as he seated himself. "This is preposterous, Poirot," he protested, his voice a controlled tenor laced with indignation. "I had naught but respect for Reginald, business disputes notwithstanding." Lang's psychology was that of the calculating pragmatist, his mind a ledger where debits and credits of human interaction were meticulously balanced. The embezzlement scandal provided a motive as sharp as a stiletto, revenge to silence the accuser and preserve his reputation. Timeline inconsistencies surfaced during the interrogation. Lang claimed to have excused himself for a cigar at precisely 8:45, yet a waiter's testimony placed him lingering near the decanter at 8:50, a discrepancy that Poirot noted with a twitch of his mustache. Behavioral patterns revealed further clues. Lang's furtive glances toward the door, indicative of a psyche burdened by secrets, and the subtle perspiration upon his brow, a physiological betrayal of anxiety. Young Arthur Harrington was next, his entrance marked by a swagger that faltered under Poirot's penetrating gaze. The nephew's blonde hair was tousled, his eyes darting like those of a fox evading hounds, and he slumped into the chair with feigned nonchalance. "Uncle was a miser, but murder? Absurd!" he exclaimed, his voice cracking slightly on the final syllable. Physically, Arthur presented the picture of dissipated youth, his lithe form clad in rumpled evening attire, his hands fidgeting ceaselessly, a habit that spoke volumes to Poirot's observant eye. Arthur's psyche was a vortex of desperation, entangled in the snares of gambling debts that threatened to engulf him. The motive was avarice, unadorned and urgent. Sir Reginald's fortune represented salvation, and disinheritance loomed as a specter. Physical clues included footprints imprinted in the plush carpet near the sideboard, matching the tread of Arthur's shoes, suggesting anxious pacing or proximity to the fatal cup. A hidden letter, discovered in a cursory search of his quarters, revealed menacing demands from creditors, a psychological pressure cooker that might have propelled him to drastic measures. Madame Elise Dupont followed, her severe, chignon and rigid posture evoking the image of a governess from a bygone era, her eyes meeting Poirot's with unflinching resolve. "This establishment is my legacy, monsieur," she declared, her voice steady as granite. "Why would I imperil it with such folly?" Physically imposing in her austerity, Madame Dupin's frame was unyielding, yet Poirot detected a faint tremor in her clasped hands, a chink in her armored facade. Her psychology was one of stoic guardianship, scarred by the tragedy of her sister's demise at the hands of Sir Reginald's callousness. A motive of vengeful justice, fermented over years. In the hotel's kitchen stores, a vial of arsenic had been unearthed, its presence pointing accusatory fingers, though Poirot pondered if it were not a misdirection, planted to ensnare the unwary. Her alibi held firm, yet a behavioral anomaly. Her unusual pallor throughout the evening suggested emotional entanglement beyond mere hospitality. Last to be summoned was Dr. Elena Voss, her ash-blonde crop and intense gray eyes lending her the aura of a modern Valkyrie, her medical bag clutched like a talisman. She seated herself with professional poise, her voice crisp and Teutonic. As a healer, Monsieur Poirot, I am sworn to preserve life, not extinguish it. Physically, she exuded controlled vitality, her movements precise as a scalpel's incision. Dr. Voss's psyche was etched with the indelible ink of loss. Sir Reginald's wartime profiteering had obliterated her family's fortunes, nurturing a motive of retribution that burned with the intensity of a forge. Her bag, inspected discreetly, contained hypodermics and vials, tools of her trade that could double as instruments of death, a red herring or damning evidence. Timeline slips emerged. She asserted solitude in her chamber at 8:30, yet a fellow guest's testimony placed her in the corridor moments later, an inconsistency that Poirot filed away like a precious gem. As the interrogations concluded, the library's fire had dwindled to embers, mirroring the fading storm outside, now reduced to a desultory drizzle. Poirot rose, his mind a repository of clues, mismatched footprints, erratic behaviors, intertwined motives of money, revenge, and concealed secrets. The shadows of suspicion lengthened, enveloping each suspect in a shroud of doubt. Yet the Belgian detective knew that truth lurked in the interstices, awaiting the illumination of his little gray cells. The night wore on, the hotel a silent witness to the unfolding drama, as Poirot pondered the mosaic's completion. Chapter 4. The Web of Deception. As the witching hour descended upon the Hotel Magnifique, the storm's fury began to wane, leaving in its wake a pervasive dampness that seeped into the very bones of the ancient edifice. The once roaring tempest had subsided to intermittent drizzles, but the air remained heavy with humidity, cloaking the corridors in a misty veil that blurred the boundaries between reality and illusion. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the lateness of the hour, traversed these labyrinthine passages with the purposeful stride of a man on a quest for enlightenment. His egg-shaped head was bowed in contemplation, his mustache twitching as his little gray cells orchestrated a symphony of deductions. The Belgian detective's psychology was a bastion of methodical precision. He viewed the crime not as a random act of malice, but as a meticulously woven web, where each strand of evidence interconnected to ensnare the perpetrator. Deeper into the night he delved, his investigations extending beyond mere interrogations into the tangible relics of the deed, seeking to unravel the deceptions that shrouded the truth. The dining hall, now a sanctified crime scene guarded by a solitary gendarme, was Poirot's first port of call. Under the dim glow of a single lamp, he examined the fatal coffee cup, its porcelain surface marred by the remnants of the deadly brew. Physical evidence presented itself forthwith. Faint fingerprints, smudged as if impressed through gloves, adhered to the handle. Not those of Sir Reginald, whose robust grip would have left bolder marks, but blurred impressions that suggested premeditation. Poirot's keen eye discerned a residue of the poison, cyanide, as confirmed by the preliminary autopsy conducted under Dr. Voss's auspices, a toxin swift and merciless, administered in the narrow window between 8:55 and 9, when the cups were distributed amid the dessert's flourish. Nearby, on the sideboard, a scrap of fabric caught his attention. A silken thread from a man's cufflink, torn perhaps in haste, implicating Mr. Victor Lang or young Arthur Harrington, whose attire featured such embellishments. Yet, upon closer scrutiny with his magnifying glass, a tool as indispensable to him as his gray cells, Poirot noted the fiber's resemblance to those from Madame Elise Dupin's apron, a clever misdirection that could exonerate or condemn, depending on the weave of the narrative. Venturing beyond the hall, Poirot ascended to the guest suites, his footsteps muffled by the thick Aubusson carpets that lined the upper floors. In Lady Amelia Harrington's chamber, a room adorned with silken draperies and the faint perfume of lavender, he conducted a discreet perusal, authorized by the inspector's warrant. Amid her personal effects, concealed within the pages of a leather-bound diary, lay revelations that twisted the motives into a Gordian knot. The entries, penned in an elegant script, confessed to a clandestine affair with Victor Lang, a liaison born of mutual loneliness and resentment toward Sir Reginald's tyranny. "Victor understands my solitude," one passage read, "whereas Reginald sees only his empire." This psychological exploration illuminated Lady Amelia's psyche anew, not merely a victim of neglect, but an active participant in betrayal, her motive evolving from mere inheritance to a collaborative scheme of liberation. The diary's disclosures intertwined her fate with Lang's, suggesting a conspiracy where love and avarice conspired against the industrialist. Poirot pondered the red herring herein, the lace scrap from her gown, perhaps deliberately placed to divert attention from this deeper entanglement. Descending to Arthur Harrington's quarters, a disheveled suite redolent of cigar smoke and spilled brandy, Poirot unearthed further layers of deception. Amid the nephew's scattered belongings, playing cards, empty flasks, and crumpled racing forms, lay a sheaf of gambling chits, their sums astronomical and their creditors unforgiving. One name recurred with ominous frequency: Heinrich Voss, brother to Dr. Elena Voss, a shadowy figure in the underworld of Monte Carlo's casinos. This hidden connection forged a chain of motive that bound Arthur to the physician. Debts owed to her kin provided leverage for blackmail, or perhaps a pact of mutual benefit wherein Arthur's inheritance would settle accounts and Voss's revenge would be sated. Arthur's psychology, already a maelstrom of desperation, now revealed depths of duplicity, his nervous fidgeting not mere anxiety, but the manifestation of a soul ensnared in a web of obligations. The footprints near the sideboard, matching his shoe treads, took on new significance. Not accidental pacing, but deliberate proximity to the poisoned vessel. The clock's chimes heralded 1 o'clock as Poirot proceeded to the hotel's service areas, where Madame Dupin's office overlooked the kitchens. The proprietress, roused from fitful slumber, granted access with reluctant grace, her severe features etched with fatigue. Among her ledgers and correspondence, Poirot discovered a forged note, ostensibly in Sir Reginald's hand, accusing her of extortion tied to the old scandal of her sister's demise. "You shall not blackmail me further," it read, the ink fresh and the script a clumsy imitation. This misdirection was patent to Poirot's expert eye, The paper mismatched Sir Reginald's stationery, and the phrasing lacked his bombastic style, planted, no doubt, to cast suspicion upon Madame Dupont and obscure the true culprit's trail. Her psychology, one of vengeful fortitude, was complicated by this artifact. Was she the victim of a frame, or the architect of her own defense? The arsenic vial in the kitchen, too conveniently located, reinforced the red herring, its presence a beacon for hasty conclusions. Dr. Elena Voss's room, a Spartan abode with medical texts stacked like sentinels, yielded clues of a more cerebral nature. Her bag, left unguarded in the haste of the evening's events, contained hypodermics and phials of various compounds, including traces of cyanide, ostensibly for therapeutic purposes, but potent enough for lethality. Voss's medical knowledge rendered her a prime suspect, her steady demeanor a mask for calculated malice. Timeline inconsistencies plagued her alibi. She claimed seclusion at 8:30, yet the corridor sighting at 8:35 suggested mobility during the critical juncture. Poirot's gray cells whirred. Her brother's link to Arthur added a familial dimension, transforming personal revenge into a collaborative vendetta. As the first hints of dawn tinged the eastern horizon, Poirot ventured onto the storm-drenched terrace, the flagstones slick underfoot and the air crisp with renewal. Here, amid the potted palms battered by the gale, he traced faint footprints leading to a discarded vial, its label eroded by rain but bearing the ghost of a chemical insignia, cyanide, washed away yet indelible in implication. The prints, partially obliterated, matched none definitively, leaving only psychological imprints of desperation. A hasty disposal under cover of the tempest. This physical clue, elusive as a phantom, underscored the web's intricacy, misdirections layered upon deceptions, motives entangled like vines in a forgotten garden. Returning to the library, Poirot assembled the fragments before the dying embers. The smudged cup, the fabric scrap, the diary's confessions, the gambling chits, the forged note, the vial's shadow. Motives proliferated. Money for Arthur and Lady Amelia, revenge for Voss and Dupont, survival for Lang, all interwoven in a tapestry of human frailty. Lang's alibi, reliant upon the lounge clock that ran 5 minutes slow, a detail confirmed by a discreet adjustment of his own pocket watch, crumbled under scrutiny, placing him at the scene during the poisoning. The Belgian detective paced, his mind a crucible where evidence fused into insight. The storm had abated, but the true revelation loomed with the rising sun as Poirot neared the denouement of this elaborate deception. Chapter 5. The Revelation of the Grey Cells. In the grand salon of the Hôtel Magnifique, where ornate tapestries depicted scenes of mythic heroism and crystal sconces gleamed like captured stars, the suspects convened at Hercule Poirot's summons. The tempest had finally relinquished its grip on the Riviera, leaving the world outside washed clean, the azure sea now placid under the emerging sun. Yet within these walls, the atmosphere remained charged, a palpable tension hanging like a shroud over the assembled company. The salon, with its Louis XV furnishings and vaulted ceiling painted in celestial motifs, served as the stage for the denouement, a revelation that would pierce the veil of deception and restore order to the chaos of murder. Poirot stood at the room's center, his diminutive form commanding the space with an authority born of intellect rather than stature. His mustache bristled with purpose, his green eyes alight with the fire of deduction as he surveyed the faces before him. Lady Amelia's composed yet weary elegance, Victor Lang's guarded sharpness, Arthur Harrington's sullen defiance, Madame Elise Dupont's stoic rigidity, and Dr. Elena Voss's unflinching intensity. Each bore the marks of a sleepless night, their psyches laid bare in the dawn's unforgiving light. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice a melodious Belgian inflection that cut through the silence like a well-honed blade. "The hour has arrived for Hercule Poirot to illuminate the shadows that have enshrouded this tragic affair. This murder, executed with a cunning that rivals the labyrinths of Crete, was no act of impulsive passion, but a meticulously orchestrated symphony of malice, where every note, every clue, harmonizes to reveal the conductor." He paced deliberately, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the floor, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of contemplative mastery. The Belgian detective's psychology was a paragon of logical symmetry. He abhorred the asymmetry of unresolved enigmas, viewing the human condition as a puzzle where motives, opportunities, and deceptions interlocked with mathematical precision. The little gray cells, those tireless artisans of truth, had labored through the night, forging connections from the disparate fragments of evidence. "Let us commence with the method of the crime," Poirot continued, his gaze sweeping the room like a searchlight. "Sir Reginald Harrington succumbed to cyanide, a poison as swift as it is insidious, administered in his coffee during the fatal feast. The cup bore smudged fingerprints, gloved, but tainted with a trace of truffle sauce from the quail, a residue transferred only by one who handled the dish intimately. This physical clue, mes amis, narrows the field." Gasps rippled through the assembly, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Yet we must not hasten to conclusions, for red herrings abound like fish in the Mediterranean. The scrap of lace near the service, torn from Lady Amelia's gown, perhaps in the commotion, or planted to mislead. The footprints in the carpet, matching Arthur's tread, suggestive of proximity, but not proof of guilt." Lady Amelia shifted uneasily, her sapphire eyes flickering with a mix of dread and defiance. Her psyche, a fortress of suppressed emotions, now cracked under the pressure of scrutiny. "Monsieur Poirot, surely you do not suspect me?" she ventured, her voice a tremulous whisper. Poirot turned to her with a sympathetic incline of his head. "Madame, your motive is transparent as crystal. The inheritance that would unshackle you from a marriage of convenience. And the diary, the diary reveals depths unsuspected, an affair with Monsieur Lang, intertwining your fates in a knot of jealousy and ambition." Lang's face blanched, his spectacles slipping slightly as he protested. "Preposterous. Our partnership was strictly business." But Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Non, monsieur, the embezzlement, funds siphoned to fuel your schemes, exposed by Sir Reginald, provided motive for silence. Your alibi, reliant on the lounge clock that lagged 5 minutes, places you at the decanter during the critical moment. And the fabric scrap? From your cufflink, not Madame Dupont's apron as first surmised. A misdirection you hoped would confound," Arthur Harrington interjected with youthful bravado, his blonde locks disheveled, his eyes darting. "This is madness. I had debts, yes, but murder my uncle? Never." His psychology, a turbulent sea of entitlement, betrayed him in the quiver of his lip. Poirot nodded sagely. "Ah, the gambling shits, mon jeune ami, reveal a desperate soul, and the connection to Heinrich Voss, debts owed to Dr. Voss's brother, suggests a pact where your inheritance settles scores and her revenge is consummated. The footprints, your anxious pacing, or a deliberate approach to the cup." Arthur slumped, his defiance crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. Madame Elise Dupont, her chignon unyielding as her posture, met Poirot's gaze with steely resolve. "Monsieur, my sister's tragedy fuels no murder. This hotel is my honor." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, madame, the forged note accusing you of blackmail, a clumsy imitation, was planted to divert suspicion. Your motive of vengeance burns, yet the arsenic vial in the kitchen? A red herring, too obvious for one of your subtlety." Dr. Voss, her gray eyes unflinching, added, "My medical bag holds tools of healing, not harm. The cyanide traces, for legitimate purposes." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Oui, docteur, but your timeline falters. The corridor sighting contradicts your solitude. Your family's ruin at Sir Reginald's hands nurtures retribution, and the link to Arthur's debts weaves you into the web." The room fell into a profound hush, the dawn's light now fully illuminating the faces, etching lines of anticipation and fear. Poirot paused dramatically, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial timbre. "Yet, mes amis, the true culprit is not ensnared by a single motive, but by the convergence of clues. The gloved prince with truffle sauce. Only Monsieur Lang handled the quail with such intimacy, his gloves concealing the act. The slow clock? A calculated reliance, but Poirot verifies all temporal anomalies. The embezzlement ledger, hidden in your valise, exposes the fraud. Sir Reginald's discovery threatened ruin, prompting the poison's deployment during the toast, when attention diverted. Lang rose abruptly, his lean frame quivering. "Nonsense! You have no proof." But Poirot produced the ledger from his pocket, its pages damning. "Au contraire, monsieur, this document, retrieved from your room, chronicles the theft. Your psychological strain, furtive glances, clenched jaw, betrayed you from the outset. The affair with Lady Amelia, a secondary entanglement, perhaps providing collusion, but the primary motive is survival. You poisoned the coffee, ensuring Sir Reginald's black brew received the fatal dose, while others' cream diluted any suspicion." Under the weight of Poirot's unyielding logic, Lang's facade shattered. He sank back, sobs racking his frame. It was I. The pressure, the exposure. He would have destroyed me. I never meant, but the opportunity. Confessions tumbled forth, a cascade of remorse and rationalization, as the gendarmerie stepped forward to apprehend him. Poirot nodded with quiet satisfaction. Order is restored, the symmetry of justice prevails. The little gray cells have triumphed once more over the disorder of crime. The salon exhaled collectively, the tension dissipating like mist in the morning sun. Lady Amelia wept softly. Arthur stared in stunned relief. Madame Dupont's rigidity softened, and Dr. Voss inclined her head in grudging respect. The Hotel Magnifique, purged of its shadow, basked in the dawn's promise, the French Riviera awakening to a day unmarred by secrets. As the authorities led Lang away, Poirot turned to the window, gazing at the serene sea. Ah, the human soul, such a tapestry of light and dark. But truth, mes amis, ever emerges victorious.